Today we're going to be looking at wild-caught and imported animals. Are they bad? Should you buy them? We're going to take a look at both of these questions and more. I'm Ethan, and this is Radiant Reptilia. Everyone really has a different opinion when it comes to wild-caught and imported animals. Some people say it's totally okay to work with them, other people won't touch them at all. Today I'm going to explain in detail my thoughts on keeping wild-caught and imported reptiles and amphibians. So to start off our discussion, we first need to define all our terminology. Wild-caught, abbreviated WC, just refers to an animal that has been caught in the wild as opposed to bred in captivity. Another abbreviation that ties in well with this is LTC. This stands for long-term captive. This blonde hognose came to us as an LTC animal. Imported refers to animals that have been imported from outside of the US into the US for the pet trade. On the other side of the aisle, we have captive bred and captive born. Captive bred is denoted by CBB. This means that the mother and father were bred in captivity and that produced the offspring. Captive born, on the other hand, is just abbreviated CB. This refers to a mother that was taken out of the wild when she was pregnant or carrying eggs and then gave birth or laid her eggs in captivity. So it really does tie in with the import and wild-caught scene a lot more. Technically speaking, the term import could refer to animals that are captive bred and brought into the US, but for this discussion we're really just going to be focusing on wild-caught imports. Similarly, wild-caught animals could refer to animals that were wild-caught in the US, but again, for this discussion we're only going to be focusing on animals that are wild-caught and imported into the US. So now that we've cleared up our terminology and we know exactly what we're talking about in this context when we talk about wild-caught and imported animals, let's talk about the reputation that wild-caught and imported animals have. Imports that you'll find at trade shows or even at pet stores are often sick, undernourished, underfed, they're full of parasite loads, they have all kinds of issues below the surface. They're really just plagued with all sorts of different issues that you might not necessarily find from even a bad captive breeder. Plus, mass importation for the pet trade has had extreme environmental impacts as well. Russian tortoises now are considered vulnerable or threatened species because of mass importation in such volumes and for so long. At the end of the day, imported and wild-caught animals are literal garbage, and you should never even consider ever buying animals that have been imported to the US at all. All that said, the very first ball pythons in the US just magically spawned here, which is pretty convenient for that narrative. Okay, that felt good. I think we're done. Great job, guys. We're gonna be... Huh? What's that? You mean I can't enjoy having generations and generations of healthy adult ball pythons without the first ball pythons having to be imported from Africa? Well, this puts us in a bit of a pickle, doesn't it? Either the entire reptile keeping community is founded on a practice that's ultimately evil, or we need to believe that there's an ethical time, place, and manner to import and work with imported animals. In this video, we're going to cover these 3 rules that I set for myself whenever I'm going to work with an imported animal. First is time. Don't think time of day, think the timeline of an animal's history in the US or history in the pet trade. A perfect example when we're looking at timeline with imported animals would be something like this blonde hognose here. This is a species of mildly venomous rear-fanged hognose native to the islands of Madagascar. They are still fairly new to the pet trade and it's kind of uncertain whether they're going to take off or not. On the complete opposite end of the spectrum, we have something like the ball python. Ball pythons are probably the most popular snake in the pet trade. The market is completely oversaturated with them and they're really available almost everywhere, including radiantreptilia.com. Unfortunately, ball pythons are still being imported into the US, and really, unless you're dealing with some sort of rare new morph that has been recently discovered, this makes 0 sense. Everyone knows how to breed them, and they're being bred literally everywhere, so there's 0 reason for us to be importing anymore. Compared to something like the blonde hognose, the ball python's timeline in the pet trade is actually much farther progressed and on the other end of the spectrum, really. So unless we're dealing with a new morph or a new locale or something that has new significance to the pet trade or can bring something new to the table, it's really stupid that we're still importing more ball pythons. It's a waste of time, money, and most importantly, the natural resource that actually is the wild ball python. So we've kind of looked at the 2 ends of the pet trade timeline with ball pythons and blonde hognoses. If we take something like a bamboo rat snake, we really find ourselves in some sort of shade of gray. The bamboo rat snake is still new-ish to the pet trade, probably in the last 1 or 2 decades, But at the same time, they've risen in popularity really fast, and there's actually lots of people captive breeding these animals now. So if you were to go out and buy yourself an imported bamboo rat snake, I wouldn't necessarily give you a real hard time about it, but at the same time, there's plenty of captive breeders who are already working with this species intensively. Mine is in fact a captive bred animal, so there's really not too much of an excuse to be going out and buying just normal imported bamboo rat snakes. Next, we're going to talk about place. You can think about instance or situation, or really how this is going to apply to our context is the individual species that we're working with. Which species are okay to be importing and which ones should we not? So let's take a look at the dragon snake. This is obviously not an animal that I currently have with me, but they are one of the coolest looking snakes out there. I mean, just look at this thing. It literally looks like a dragon. They also never survive in captivity. I don't think anybody's ever been able to keep the species alive in captivity for more than a couple months, let alone even get close to figuring out how to breed them. Yet, because of their crazy looks, they sell for enormous amounts of money, so they're still being imported in huge amounts to the United States and sold for extremely high prices, which is really just a waste of life because none of them end up surviving in captivity. So no, this is not an animal I would really support the importation or wild catching of. The last category of species we need to talk about when we're talking about species that can or cannot be imported is conservation. If you're ever considering buying an animal that is an imported animal, a great resource to use is the IUCN Red List. You can type in just about any species on here and it'll show you all the environmental and conservational data that they have on that species. If you go in and find the blonde hognose in there, you will see that they are marked as an LC animal, or animal of least concern, and their population is stable. This means that even though they are being imported into the US, their wild population isn't really being hit very hard and is still very sustainable. On the other hand, if you go and find the Russian tortoise on the red list, you will find that they are marked as a vulnerable species, even though they are still being imported in very large amounts from their native habitat. This individual is a rescue that somebody rehomed to me. It's a personal pet of mine, and it originally did come from an importer. So back in the day, this animal, regardless of how small it was, did come from the wilds of Russia. Which, as much as I enjoy this tortoise, it's kind of sad to think that this was one of the animals that was really depleting that original natural resource. Another wild population that has been hit pretty hard by the pet trade is many species of day geckos, including stuff like the Standings day gecko. They are also marked as vulnerable, but they're still imported in quite large amounts. So if we look at their conservational data, I would say that, yeah, it's probably okay to be buying an imported blonde hognose, but I really would never condone purchasing a imported Russian tortoise or any sort of day gecko. So the last rule we're going to go over when we discuss animals that have been imported is manner. Think the manner in which these animals are being kept. So I know after the very first depressing part of this video, it's hard to imagine that there are actually vendors that take good care of imported animals, but I know there must be some of them because I am one of them. While we don't actually import any animals ourselves, Radiant Reptilia does get in a number of animals that were originally imports, such as this blonde hognose that we keep coming back to. If you go ahead and Google blonde hognose for sale, I guarantee you, don't bite me. Thanks. Goofball.
Is it bad?
What?
Good?
He just gave me a little nip. I don't even know if he envenomated me or not. Their venom is very mild. It's it usually results in a bruise and a headache if they actually get you.
I thought we didn't have venomous.
We don't have any hot snakes, nothing dangerous.
Mildly.
So if you Google blonde hognose for sale, I can almost guarantee you that the first 10 or 20 results will be importers that have fairly bad reputations, typically just for taking really bad care of their animals. So good vendors and good importers are out there, but they're a lot smaller and they're harder to find. If you are trying to find a species of animal that is typically imported, and you're trying to find a good vendor or seller, word of mouth is one of the best ways that honestly this information is spread. So ask around if you're on a Discord or a Facebook page or a Reddit group or something. Ask around, see what people have to say. And if you know any good importers or vendors, spread the word, let people know. So they can really be getting good business and good attention as opposed to importers that take really bad care of their animals but have a really high online presence when it comes to SEO or search results. So time, place, and manner, those are the 3 rules that we went over, but where do these rules take us in the long run? Will breeders or vendors ever be incentivized to actually move away from importation? I believe the answer is yes, because at the end of the day, if you, the consumer, pushes for quality husbandry and conservation and refuses to buy animals that break any of the 3 rules that we went over, then ultimately it's actually a lot cheaper for breeders and sellers to produce these animals by captive breeding them, as opposed to having to deal with medical issues and vet visits and importation international shipping costs of actually bringing these animals in. With animals that are popular, it's only cheaper to be importing them if you're keeping them at base level, really cruddy conditions. If you actually keep them at a quality standard, it actually becomes a lot cheaper if you can figure out how to captive breed them, as opposed to importing them in mass numbers. So there you have it. That's my thoughts on imported and wild-caught animals. Again, this video only focused on wild-caught imported animals into the US. I can do another video on some of the other wild-caught animals at another time. Let me know if that's something you guys would like to see. If you guys have any other questions about imports and wild-caught animals, feel free to drop that in the comment section below. Otherwise, I'm Ethan. You've been watching Radiant Reptilia, and I'll see you in the next video.